As we welcome everyone once again to this virtual faith development and youth ministry programming webinar, and we'll be introducing ourselves shortly and hope that everyone is fairly comfortable with Zoom, but if you aren't, we do have a tech host with us, Jessica Curran, and you're very welcome to send her messages if you should need some support. And we will be introducing ourselves in a moment, but our opening reading, let's go to some liberation theology. Whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teaches in the act of learning. And I'm going to actually grab my chalice. Whatever the educator does in teaching is make it possible for students to become themselves. And this last bit is just from me. Thank you so much for your commitment to learning and to teaching and helping our youth and all of us to become more ourselves today and in the days to come, from the incredible wisdom of Paulo Freire.
So with that, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Cameron Young. I am a congregational life consultant for both the Southern and Mid-America regions of the UUA. I am calling from Fort Worth, Texas, and I see that Thomas Earthman has our Fort Worth stockyards hanging up as his background. So nice to see some familiarity there. So I've been on UUA staff for about a year. Before that, I served as a lifespan religious educator in a congregation here. Let's see, what else? Pronouns. Pronouns are they, them, theirs.
And I am Nancy Combs Morgan. I'm blessed to be a colleague of Cameron, and we're also going to be inviting another colleague to introduce themselves in a moment. But I'm also a congregational life consultant serving in the Southern and Mid-America regions, and this is my 17th year. We both have a particular passion for youth ministry and have served in some time in that regard. And as we go to asking everyone to introduce yourself shortly in the chat box, we'd also like to acknowledge some UUA staff colleagues who are here with us. One of our amazing co-leads, Natalie Briscoe. Would you unmute yourself, Natalie, and introduce yourself?
Sure, Nancy. Hi, everybody. It's really good to see you. My name is Natalie Briscoe. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Austin, Texas, and I am indeed one of the co-leads of the Southern region. This is my 7th year on UUA staff. And my goodness, I became a religious educator at the end of 2003. So it's been a little minute now, hasn't it? It's really great to see all of you.
And we're thrilled that you can be with us. We also would like to do a shout out, and I think hopefully you can unmute yourself. Jenica Davis Hockett, would you introduce yourself?
Oh, goodness, I'd love to. Hi, I'm Jenica Davis Hockett. I'm with the Lifespan Faith Engagement Office. I have my camera off because I'm about 8.5 months pregnant and I'm reclined right now. So I am youth ministry specialist in Lifespan Faith Engagement, and I've been with the UUA just about 7 years as well.
Thank you so much, Jenica. You be comfortable, Missy, absolutely. So I'm scanning quickly, and I think that's it. We were expecting some other UUA staffers. If so, we'll be sure to acknowledge them later on. But let's actually close screen for a moment and have everyone please write in the chat who you are and which congregation you're from. And maybe that would be a good start. I think we've got about 30 people on with us, so please, and we will follow the chat and see who's here with us. Hopefully folks have used Zoom before. Thank you so much, Sherry. Welcome from First UU San Antonio, and Jennifer Hackett from First UU Nashville, and I'll let others just read along. This is wonderful. Marvelous. Fantastic. And as we move forward, and people are always welcome to continue to write in the chat, let's acknowledge that we are an intentional learning community tonight. None of us are experts. We're all here collaboratively to learn. And so with that said, I think that, Cameron, you wanted to say something as a centering or as a sort of an opening?
Yeah, so back to what Nancy said, something I think worth acknowledging is that we all come from about the same level of experience in terms of doing faith development in the time of pandemic, and that amount of experience is very little for all of us, making us essentially all beginners at this. So we don't necessarily claim to be teachers nor experts. We're hoping to learn from all of you, and please know that we are still figuring out things out as we go through copious amounts of trial and error. So thank you for being here with us and being partners in that process with us. The other thing I want to say is that I think this is a message that a lot of us need to hear, and probably a lot of us are not getting, is that you are enough. Our working circumstances have radically changed over the last 6 months, and for many of us, our life circumstances in the midst of the pandemic have made our working life even more difficult. I'm thinking especially about people with young children at home, but really a lot of us have our own challenges and hurdles that we're up against, and yet, you know, we're so much more online, and we're on social media more, and with that we're given ever more competing voices telling us we aren't good enough, and we're not doing enough, and we need to read this and do that, and be this and be that, and I think our system, our UU system, and our larger system, which is totally rooted in individualistic culture, which is also a component of white supremacy culture, it pressures us into having to finding or creating this next big shiny program that's going to radically change faith development and attract the masses. And I'm here to remind us all that we don't have to save the world. Each and every one of us is enough, and collectively what we can do together is can be great. So if I can get my slides to go. Let's try this again. There we go. So
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think we have some folks from outside of the southern region who are here with us this evening, but for those of you who are in the southern region, it will not surprise you if you've taken part in any other leadership experiences that covenant is at the center of everything we do, and it is value driven. Here we are with an image before us of these wonderful prayer beads, which are in the shape of a mandala, with all different hands joining together, but making sure that they're leaning into something. And that something is our agreement, our pledge of how we are together. And as a lifespan faith community that seeks to serve all, let us remember that that center is does have room enough for all. So let's go to the next slide. With the whole church vision, and this also is something very familiar, adapted from Connie Goodbread, UU faith development is all we do. Everything we teach is Unitarian Universalism, and the congregation is the curriculum. That still applies during this time of COVID-19, but now we're looking at the entire virtual experience and how it religiously educates, which is another lens and which calls us to think beyond emergent responses. is. So for 5 months, noble warriors, you have been making sure that your congregations have had some sort of online experience, whether you're simply direct, not simply, but that whether you are creating the religious education meetups or whether you're part of also creating worship or youth group sessions, whatever that is, every single one of those efforts have communicated that community is important, connection is important, that it is important that everyone has an opportunity to actually do that, to connect. So tonight we're going to be looking at, and again, this is an intentional learning community where we're learning from one another, ways that we can make sure that we virtually have this. So let's lift up where we should be headed for. Let's look at the horizon. When we think of Unitarian Universalist principles and values as being the heartbeat of that covenant, the values that manifest from that covenant center come from this reflection here, which is about more hope, more love, more courage, more justice, and more joy in the world. But what if we were so bold as to imagine and to seek where we are actually helping to create experiences for children, youth, and adults that are a part of a virtual UU community which seeks all of those things, a little bit of hope. We're hoping that anyone that connects with you, who perhaps is carrying the burden of fear and frustration, whether they are 13 or whether they are 80, that when they literally zoom in to your congregational Zoom sessions, they're having a moment where they can lay that burden down and perhaps hear a piece of music or experience a reading or something that will fill them back up with a bit more hope. They will definitely be experiencing more love because they're going to be looking into your shining eyes, and hopefully you will be taking joy in each other's living. More courage, just the fact that you're keeping on, the fact that you continue to want to reach out to one another, to have those worship sessions, to have those religious education sessions, that demonstrates profound courage, and especially naming the fact that many of your communities are experiencing loss. So you're having to do for the very first time online worship, online memorial services. That takes a tremendous amount of courage to say that, yes, we can continue to do this. Of course, always seeking more justice and more joy in the world. So those are our anchors. That's where our values, our covenant is at the heart of that. Our values are embodied around that. But we need to make sure that no matter how many people, whether you are staff, whether you're a congregational president tonight or whoever you might be, if you have people urgently asking you how many people are showing up, let's just focus on counting numbers. Let's not just look at the numbers of people who are dropping in, who are showing up at these meetups and virtual opportunities. Let's actually use the lens of, are we making sure that there is a heightening of interpersonal relationships? Can we go back to that last slide for a moment? So I'm going to pause here. Any thoughts on how we can maintain those relationships, especially between youth and their peers, as well as youth and adults in a time of COVID? If you want to just maybe write something in the chat if anyone has any idea about how to maintain those relationships. I've got a couple of suggestions, but I'd love to see if anyone else has any ideas. I'm hearing some chatting going on. Let's see, and that's okay if we'll have breakout time later to look at these questions as well. As you're thinking about this, the main way we can make sure that we maintain relationships is to be trustworthy and predictable. And look, we have from Kristen Rounds, high school youth meet weekly for check-ins. That is a really good way to maintain relationship. What I mean by predictable is that even for youth who are not able to attend regularly, they know that there's a structure there. They know there's a routine where there is some session that they can make sure that is on the horizon. And we'll continue to look in the chat and then go to the next slide. Thank you, Jen. Asking youth what they need and want from their UU community. From Beth, maintaining relationships by playing together. Absolutely. Minecraft, Jackbox, art projects. Thank you so much. So this is my echoing refrain. Natalie and Cameron and I companion and coach congregational leaders, especially religious professionals. We've been reaching out and trying to connect as much as possible. And again, one of the greatest sources of anxiety that I'm hearing, especially from religious educators and youth coordinators, is that the attendance has been low. They're looking at attendance numbers and perhaps even trying to justify to a board that yes, we are actually getting people successfully taking part. It's not just about attendance. The real measure of opportunities are looking at methods of engagement, all that your congregation is offering, from online fellowship opportunities to Sunday morning worship, small group check-ins, the fun games that were just listed. Many religious educators are also offering fixed resources online where people can just go to those resources. Even that's a form of engagement. And if we could see the rest of this slide, thank you so much. If it appears, and perhaps it doesn't, and not to worry.
There is sometimes a lag.
Yes. And look,
between
Natalie.
PowerPoint and Zoom.
Yeah, Natalie Briscoe is Dungeons and Dragons are very doable online. There are plenty of dungeon masters in our UU community. What I was going to highlight.
Me, like,
yes.
on the space bar, just waiting for it to.
It'll be that golden nugget that reappears later on, and it wasn't that earth-shattering. So let's transition. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Just when I gave up on engagement, it appears. So here, I'll share a little bit about myself. In addition to being a faith development person, and a religious educator, I also have spent 17 years as a trauma chaplain, specialty with youth and adolescents. And the part that I know to be true is that in time of crisis, youth need to feel like there's something around them that is safe. And so what you all are doing nobly is creating safe spaces. And we'll talk a little bit later on about how to make sure that you're creating a virtual safe space. But here's the part that is strangely protective. Often we think that this means that we just need to be protective and make sure that youth don't feel the stress of the system. But what they really need is to make sure that they are needed, that there is something that that we are seeking for them to contribute, that their contributions are not superfluous, that they are truly a part of the community. So looking at methods of engagement around that, I think, is really very important. And anytime Natalie or Cameron, you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I think what's important to consider, and you'll notice that a lot of these don't change even between before the time of the pandemic and after. Youth still have certain vital needs, and needs which often churches can help to meet. So I think it's important to ask what are the vital needs, because like Nancy said, I don't think anybody has the bandwidth right now for things that are excessive or superfluous. So when thinking about the vital needs of youth, we have pastoral care. Needless to say, the pastoral climate, some things are similar, some things are very different and specifically pandemic related. That youth are coming across, and we'll explore those soon. Fellowship, having safe and affirming spaces for checking in, that's vital. Was vital before, is vital now. Having theological reflection. Youth are theologians. Youth are always asking the deeper questions. It's just finding the medium for which they can express it. Sometimes that comes verbally, sometimes it comes in other ways, musically, artistically, kinesthetically. But youth, by nature of who they are asking the deeper questions. Who am I? What do I believe? What is my place in the world? you know, if there were a time to ask these deeper theological questions, adolescence is one of those vital times. It's that search for belonging. And so that, again, that doesn't change, that enhances in the time of COVID, in this time now than ever, because we have such a shifted climate. There are deeper existential questions that surface for all of us right now, and maybe not just with COVID, but with you know, the upcoming election, with our political climate, with, you know, massive amounts of oppression towards Black and brown and trans people. How does being a Unitarian Universalist in this time, what does that look like? Obviously, celebration of milestones. When I think about you know, a major point of grief for my cousin just graduated high school, going to a new university on a golf scholarship. He didn't get to play his final tournaments. He didn't get to have, you know, his senior year, essentially, or the last part of his senior year as he had expected. Not necessarily getting to start college in the way that he's expected. There's a lot of grief that goes into that. And yet there's room for churches and faith communities to come in and celebrate these milestones where they're grieving the fact that they don't look the same as they had grown accustomed to. Graduation doesn't look the same. Senior year doesn't look the same. Starting college doesn't look the same. So nothing looks the same. What can look the same? We need to find what is familiar, because that becomes so much more essential during this time where everything is shifting and so many things are unpredictable. What can you cling to? What can be that cornerstone of calm in the middle of the storm? And to me, that answer is ritual. That answer is spiritual practice. And how can we channel those into the virtual sphere? So what else? What are some other vital needs that we haven't maybe necessarily talked about? I invite you all to share in the chat. All right. Belonging. Lauren Daniel says belonging. Absolutely a vital need. Fun. Heck yeah. Thank you for that reminder, Jessica. Fun. What does fun look like when you don't get to go see friends, when you have to spend 12 hours a day on a screen? Hope. Yeah. Hope, says Katie. Sage says recognition. Thomas says listening to their suggestions about worship. So being heard. Being heard, knowing that you're respected, that you have a place. Diana says helping the youth envision a way forward for themselves, to know that they have the resources to move into an uncertain future. And by resources, I imagine spiritual resources as a part of that, spiritual and communal resources. Beth Klein, looking outward to others, they can still reach out and make a difference. Sam Wilson says community, their second family, adults to talk to who aren't their parents, places to discuss current events. Yep. Perhaps being stuck at home with parents, there is counseling needed. Absolutely. So a lot of these vital needs that we're discussing, they, like I said, they were vital before the time of COVID and still remain vital. And they all fit into, many of you may be familiar with this, but the Web of Youth Ministry. Just waiting for the next slide. So the Web of Youth Ministry, which is a resource co-created by Reverend Beth Dana and Jesse Yeager, is a way to contextualize the essential parts of a balanced youth group. What are the vital things that they all do to meet the needs of their community? I'm just waiting for this slide to come up. Come on. You can hear me bang on the space bar.
We're creating the web as we get there. And we'll get there.
This is what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to come out of it. And then...
Okay. That's okay. You know, while we're doing that, rebooting it, I would like to go back to milestones, because I'll tell you what, you all, as staffers, we are so inspired because we follow all of the messaging and the crowdsourcing and the Facebook sharing, and around bridging and graduations, we were humbled at the huge efforts. Does someone want to unmute for a moment and share a little bit about how you maybe your congregation acknowledged? I know there were drive-by celebrations, there were sort of cap and gown parades on Zoom, there were anybody? Or other milestones?
Well, for bridging, we've visited every bridger's house and gave them a care package with readings, a chalice, the fixings to make an altar, and chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, Lauren, that's
well,
so sweet.
Of course, we checked with the parents to make sure they could consume the chocolate chip cookies. And of course, the cookies were the most, I'm sorry. Cookies were very popular, but also notes from the congregation. They emailed us the notes and we printed them out on nice stationery and put them in the boxes that we delivered.
Oh, that's inspiring. Anybody else? Are we still waiting? Please.
We ran the kids the links to their addresses on our weekly SurveyMonkey email digest. And they did that about the 3 weeks prior to graduation, and then the graduations were canceled. But they still had this like a card shower. I know it's hokey and it's old fashioned, but they loved it. And then their bridging ceremony was virtually, well, yes, it was virtually identical to the regular bridging, with really high attendance online. And we had them in the sanctuary. They did their bridging testimonials, and it was really very similar. And then we had a really great party, virtual party afterwards.
Oh, you all are getting me goose pimples. That is wonderful. I hear someone trying to unmute. Okay. So how's our slide deck coming?
Yeah, let's try this second gander at the slides. I was able to just sort of manually go to it. All right. Our Web of Youth Ministry.
There, oh, isn't it pretty? Oh, yes, there we go. So for those of you all who have been serving for a while, you may have experienced this. It is the anchor. So we talked about covenant center and values, UU values, as being the real absolute centering of all of our work. But in terms of youth ministry, we really make sure to be considering all of these elements: spiritual care, beloved community, justice making, faith exploration, multi-generational relationships. Always pause on that one, always important. Covenantal leadership and identity formation, and of course, pastoral care. Well, guess what? Those needs in the Web of Youth Ministry have not disappeared simply because we are now virtual communities. And if the slides will allow us, let's go to the next one. Okay, everybody, hold your breath. Woohoo! Identity formation.
The slide gods.
Yes, right. So what are we helping to do? I'll be very transparent. I'm hoping hoping to help young people grow into robust, healthy, amazing human beings who actually are in love with Unitarian Universalism. So a part of that identity and making sure that they're a part of a dynamic youth ministry is supporting who they are, supporting their journeys, figuring out who they are as spiritual beings, relational beings, their own racial, ethnic understanding of self, sexual beings, people of faith, justice makers, of course, lifelong learners and leaders. Their identity in family and multi-generational community is vital. Identity cannot happen in a bubble off in space. So I'm going to turn this for a second. Natalie, are you still with us? Do you have anything you want to say about identity? And you can throw it back to me and maybe you want to share later on.
I am still here. I mean, you all are just doing such a spectacular job of covering every single
Okay.
point. I'm not sure if I have anything to add other than to say, you know, the web of youth ministry is so brilliant and so poignant. And I want to point out that Jenica, who's on the call with us, created a curriculum around bringing the web to life that you can use. And some of the things are a lot of youth work is rooted in small group ministry. And so it's so easy to translate that to an online format because discussions and sharing information is so easy. And that's really the heart of what we do in youth ministry is that kind of connection and that kind of place. We create that kind of place. And, you know, I just want to say, Jenica, people are asking where they can get it.
I've got the link in this PowerPoint.
Fabulous. I'm so sorry. I jumped ahead of you. I'm so sorry.
No, I threw it to you. I threw the baton. And you all will get, I mean, we couldn't be UUs without either asking for a book or a resource, but there will be a lot of resources, concrete resources at the end. So Cameron, let's see if we can go on. Thanks, Nat. Anytime you want to chime in is great.
Yeah, so we're going to even address the importance of family and multi-generational community in the role of youth ministry. We're gonna definitely get there and spend some time on it. These slides.
You know what? While you're doing that, we may send this to Jessica. Ooh, there was more of the identity. I know you all are poised. So, okay. So obviously, virtual youth ministry helps youth develop a healthy identity in these areas and hopefully learn to live with integrity. So how has your congregation provided virtual UU identity formation for youth? I was seeing in some of your previous sharing, so making sure that there is a youth group session where they can talk about who they understand themselves to be and maybe have some wonderings or some open-ended questions, extremely important. And you'll be seeing me reference this throughout, but I think it's also important for them as they're working on their own narrative to have an understanding of the greater narrative. What are those stories in their congregation of what's happening right now? So let's go to the next one. Everyone cross every appendage that you possibly can. We'll see if our next slide comes up. Ooh, my favorite, spiritual development. So something really happened, a shift change in Unitarian Universalist religious education about 10 years ago, and it happened actually 12 years ago with the creation of the original Tapestry of Faith resources and the Tapestry of Faith vision statement. It was the first time in my 24 years as a UU religious educator that we actually said out loud in all of our print publications that there's something really incredibly, critically important as a life skill for our young people to have a spiritual grounding where they understand that there are practices that can help them get a bit of peace and a bit of calm in a very hectic world. But what we often looked at over that 10 or 12 years, what we emphasized was always individual practice. Now the shift change is happening and we're seeing it so true that we really need this right now, and that's group spiritual practices. And I will be giving some examples of that as we move through this. So as spiritual beings, youth experience awe, gratitude, wonder, appreciation, and at-oneness. Youth ministry should encourage and offer opportunities for engagement in practices that nurture and enliven the spirits. So how can we provide that spiritually sustaining virtual youth ministry? One example would be a time of deep listening and quiet, which seems counterintuitive. Why would you get all these people together on a Zoom session and then say, now we're going to sit for 5 minutes together and simply look at a beautiful mandala image on the screen and breathe? We're simply going to breathe with one another. We're going to take a deep breath in, a deep breath out, and just hold it. Or we're actually going to look at a beautiful bit of poetry and just quietly, contemplatively look at that together. This will help youth in having resources for living. There's lots of different ways that you can do group spiritual practices, but I hope that you all are engaging in some of those. So let's go to the next one.
Mhm. And the thing is, I'll add to this.
Please.
I have been on a multi-generational. We've helped facilitate with a lot of assistance a multi-generational spiritual direction group spiritual direction retreat with youth and adults and religious professionals alike, and it was beautiful. And just remember that youth are ready to go deeper than you might think they are. They have the capacity to engage in deep spiritual practice, to sit in stillness, to do contemplative prayer. So I would just be mindful of that. Not only are they ready to, but they crave it.
And we encourage you to think of different senses. Sometimes in virtual, we're so focused on seeing that actually closing the screen, encouraging them to turn off that image of themselves, or perhaps even just making sure that they are using their hands in a way that's very mindful. There's lots of different ways to use multiple senses, but don't just depend on seeing and hearing. And here I'm providing my wonderful colleague Phil Lund and I are very active in this group spiritual direction work, congregationally based, especially with youth and young adults. And we led a workshop on how to lead online virtual circle processes. So this is a resource for you. A part of that, and please use this with your youth groups where you're trying to actually have a more centered, spiritually deepening time, have a sequence where it's already established of who will speak, have that covenant already agreed upon, that virtual covenant, making sure that there's always time in between those moments of silence, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak if they so should choose. There's actually graphics that you can use in creating a graphic where you have a photo of each member of your youth group, and there's already a circle that you're seeing there, so you feel like you're in a circle together. So there's lots of different tips in this virtual circle process webinar. So let's continue.
Right. I've discovered that clicking my cursor is far more reliable than the space bar. If anybody's ever leading PowerPoint by Zoom,
Yeah.
take note.
So what do we know? We all need pastoral care at this time. We're living with a level of hypervigilance, a level of fear and frustration of the unknown. As I mentioned earlier, often our intuitive feeling as adults is to make sure that we're protecting and somehow trying to create spiritual bubbles around our children and youth so they aren't experiencing that depth of despair that we might be having. But what a life skill it would be to be candid and open, especially with that older cohort of teens, to name as that appropriate adult serving youth, yes, you have your own struggle of fighting despair. Here are the practices that I lean into when I can't think of positive thought, and openly sharing and then actually engaging them in that practice, but making sure that there's time for pastoral care. Now, a lot of people used to always think that that sort of joy and a concern check-in at the beginning of youth group that would just go all over the map, that was was often very kinetic and very sort of eclectic, was that pastoral care moment. Be more thoughtful in your regard of how you structure that. Actually frame it where the joy is being shared or the gift that everyone is giving one another. And then the concerns are strengthening, making sure that those concerns being named, that again, there's silence in between, that there's this pausing, that it isn't just speaking over one another, and then making sure that you're not rescuing, saving, or fixing, and you have that established in your virtual youth covenant. So, wow. And I love the fact that some of you have already shared in your milestone observations that you're reaching out in lots of different ways. I think it's so important. And again, this sense that youth need to be needed right now. They want to know that their community is looking to them to be some of the people providing this pastoral outreach, especially to elders. So what if there was this wonderful, in my home congregation, we have this zip code brigade where, like, all of us in this one particular zip code, there are youth and adults from the home congregation who are reaching out intentionally to the folks in that zip code. Do you need your lawn mowed? Do you need your dog walked? Are you okay? Do you need something picked up? And then sending cards and things. And this is the reference here to this wonderful Bringing the Web to Life resource that Jenica Davis-Hackett created.
And these slides will be emailed along with the resource list to you, so you'll be getting these links.
Mm-hmm.
Justice making. So this is a tricky thing, and I think not that all are mutually exclusive. I think when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Having your basic food, water, shelter, and then your emotional needs met. And justice is often thinking about the needs of others. And to a degree, if you're experiencing marginalization, justice work is part of your own survival. But it's hard to do justice work as a group without these fundamental pastoral and spiritual needs being met. And with that said, justice work is a part of who we are as a faith. So youth practicing answering our faith's calling to work for justice and be in solidarity with others. And now more than ever, we've seen the importance of justice. So I'm justice work, and we know that is an integral part of youth ministry. So I'm curious to know just a couple of ideas in the chat box before we move on, if y'all have ideas on ways in which your congregation has been able to engage youth in social justice efforts.
And I'll mention a couple while folks are writing. I've been really in awe of how many DREs, especially working with, of course, with the other religious professionals, have made sure that youth are involved in UU the Vote and all those sort of online efforts. Also, I heard tell, and I wish I could remember exactly what congregation, the youth were doing a Google map of all of the Confederate statues and the efforts to make sure that these statues were cited and efforts to bring them down. So they were using sort of a research component for justice, for dismantling white supremacy. And here we have of course, the wonderful resources available through the UU College of Social Justice, the UUNO office, which did a virtual spring seminar, I believe, didn't they?
And I think are planning another one.
Yeah.
As we speak. So.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, all of these organizations have UU the Vote, College of Social Justice, UUNO, all branches of the UUA. They all have explicitly virtual programming, and they all program with a lens toward youth. There's avenues to connect youth with all of these organizations, and you can Google any of these. Google UU the Vote, Google UU College of Justice, UUNO, to find out more. But if you need contact information for folks who work for these branches, please feel free to get in touch with us.
And we know there's a lot on people's plates and that you're gearing up for the fall as much as you can. And so keep it simple. So, and measure again, methods of engagement, even if it's sharing information, that's a certain level of engagement. But this is a perfect time for virtual letter writing campaigns that, lots of different things. So I'm seeing from Beth that you have organized protests, yay, holding signs on the sidewalk in front. Well done. I heard also another congregation, again, getting back to sort of neighborhoods where they were going to make sure that like all the houses that if they could would have Black Lives Matter signs. And I live in Lexington, Kentucky. And so justice for Breonna Taylor has been very, very big. So I saw one street where every single house said, say her name, say her name, say her name. So that sort of thing, youth could be involved in making sure those sorts of efforts are going on. So contextualizing, and we're hoping something pops up there. Ooh, and I'll give it to you, Cameron.
So again, I know we're giving you all of these things. We're throwing a lot of information at you. We're giving you the Web of Youth Ministry. Look at all these things that youth groups need to do. And we're also telling you, keep it simple and slow down and remember that you are enough. So I don't want you to feel like we're giving you contradictory messages. I know you can't do everything. We know you can't do everything. This is about an exchange of ideas and some direction, because we know that our context is often prohibitive of all of the ministry we want to be doing, and our context brings up very specific pastoral needs. Among those, anxiety about school starting up, parents who, I'll reiterate, and this was mentioned in somebody registered and their registration referred to parents as primary religious educators, and they really are now more than ever. They're the primary religious educators, but they need particular support because they have this choice between, sending your kids to school and putting yourself at risk, or perhaps homeschooling for the first time in your life. And both of those choices, I am not a parent, and those of you who are parents right now, my hat's off to you. Like I don't know how you're doing it, and to those of you supporting families, just remember that parents are an essential piece of doing supportive youth ministry. It cannot bypass their role. So I'm curious to know, and we'll keep it limited to a few suggestions because we need to move to our breakout session shortly. But what feedback are you getting from parents regarding their own needs in this time?
Can I jump in, Cameron, real quick?
Absolutely.
So Beth just posted that Emerson is 5 miles from the Paulding County High School, the school where the viral photo went. And the girl who posted that, her name is Hannah Waters, and she is a freshman at that high school. And she was originally suspended for posting that photo, and then they revoked her suspension when things went sort of sideways for the school, and now we know they have over 20 confirmed cases at that site, which we knew would happen. But the part of the story that I wanted to really talk about was I saw her on CNN the other day, and she noted when the reporter, and sorry, forgive me, I don't remember which one it was, they talk all day at my house. The reporter had asked if she was experiencing any backlash from her teachers or from the administration, and Hannah reported, not at this time. However, she was being consistently bullied by students in the high school, especially the seniors, who wished to return to school to have their senior year. So I just wanted to point that out to say how important our youth groups are and how important it is to continue to create those covenantal spaces where we are hopefully a bullying-free zone, and we can support our youth in continuing to do what is right during this time. I just kept thinking, I hope she has a support network like those that we've created. That's all. I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right, and speaking and segueing into that, here are some suggestions from our own Natalie about what families need during this time. And this will come in the form of a blog post. So I'm gonna give you the abridged version. But there are 5 things that Natalie named in her blog post, which will be published very soon and will be sent to you. So how can we, what do families need at this time? Giving children and youth something to look forward to, offering relationships outside of the family, sharing narrative to help process these experiences, creating opportunities for children and youth to participate virtually in whatever programs you're still doing, and giving them something to do and be a part of that doesn't involve their families, because that time of separation is actually vital and there's not enough of it right now. Natalie, do you want to add to that?
I'll be quick because this is like, you'll get a link to this blog post and it's coming out in the Southern Region newsletter tomorrow. We wanted to hold it back for this webinar, but you know, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how much families are struggling right now. And I am a parent myself, both parents in our household. Luckily, we have a parenting team, and also luckily we both kept our jobs, which means that now we both have full-time jobs and we are homeschooling to a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. And for me, it's like a pressure cooker where once, you know, school and other relationships, church, their after school activities, the sports they were in was like a release valve in our relationship, the incredibly intense relationship between a parent and a child. Now we don't have those release valves. And when you add adolescence on top of that, and the fact that naturally part of the adolescent development is to pull away from the parents, and there's very little opportunity to do that at this time. It feels like we're just sitting inside a bomb. Like the walls just continue to close in on us and there's no release. So in the blog post, I talk about the possibility for the congregation to create a little release valve for the family, in order for all of us to focus on lifting some of that pressure and our mental health. Yes, so Jessica O'Brien says that's why I mentioned counseling. It's so important, because developmentally adolescents are having probably the worst time out of all of us right now, and so I can understand you know, the desire to return to life outside the home, and yet we know emphatically that it's not safe. So you'll read that tomorrow. It'll come out and it'll be in the webinar wrap up from this series too.
I want to share that there are remarkable souls serving nationally, including Jenica Davis Hockett and also Shannon Harper, both who co-convene something called the Youth Ministry Roundtable. But each region has been involved in making sure, working with the UUA Safer Congregations team, that we are looking at explicit guidelines for appropriate behavior virtually. So with time as a constraint, let's go to the slide about the virtual guidelines for safety. And then we're going to send you to your breakout. I believe that's there.
That one, Nancy?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, that's
okay.
fine. And I'm hoping that some of you all have seen this before. We know we have been sending it out quite a bit. Cameron and I have been posting it and sharing with clusters of religious educators. It's so critically important that you understand that even virtually you need two background screened adults, that in any virtual communication that one adult is never messaging solely with a youth, that there is always some check and balance in that regard. In addition, that even during times of like pastoral care and such, you need two adults in those virtual sessions. Some adults that I know who are trying to highlight youth connecting with youth will be there, but they will not have their camera on, so the youth know that they are there, but visually the youth are not having to constantly look at the adult. And am I missing anything, Jenica or Cameron, that really needs to be highlighted in this brief moment about virtual youth safety?
Gosh, you know, the one thing I would add is feel free to reach out to Nancy, Cameron, Natalie, me, anyone on the Youth Ministry Roundtable. When you come, you will inevitably come up against those situations. For example, when you have a coming of age youth and their mentor, how are you supposed to, and they don't, you know, that's supposed to be a somewhat confidential relationship. How do you do that when you need two adults in the room and in the virtual room? So having an option of just CCing a parent or somebody like Nancy or Cameron, so that there's an extra person even though they're not their witness. And another option is something like ensuring that the meeting is transcribed or recorded and stored on a congregation's server or something if it turns out that it's just not feasible to have those two adults present.
Wonderful suggestions, Jenica. And on Zoom, there's something called Otter, if you haven't discovered it, which will transcribe for you. So let's go to the next screen, which I think might be a breakout questions. Yep. Do you want to prompt them,
So
and then Jessica will set it up?
I'm thinking 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes.
Yeah, Jessica, sorry, we're going to need to do 10 now.
So we're going to break you out into groups of 4. Some of you will be in groups of 5. And we will, and these are the 3 questions I want y'all to consider. And let's post these, we'll post these in the chat too. So what has youth ministry been like for you in this time of pandemic? I wrote for pandemic, time of pandemic. What are ways in which you've tried to engage and support youth? And just a chance to share your victories and your challenges. So we will send you into breakout rooms and reconvene in about 10 minutes.
For those of you who have not been in a breakout room before, you'll get a little blue prompt inviting you. Thank you.
So we are short on time and we want to end on time. So really quickly, if each group, if maybe somebody from each group could share sort of just a highlight of what each group talked about. And you can unmute yourself for this one. Or you can use the chat, either way.
You're welcome to put it in the chat as well.
If Sam Wilson is willing, he mentioned something to us about a camp that was very successful.
Sure, yeah. I was talking about the PWR's camp over the summer. They basically ran it as close to like a regular camp as possible. Because I'm East Coast time, it went till like midnight my time here. It was all day long. They had 90-minute breaks in between. There's middle schoolers and high schoolers, and we all got together in like the morning or like my afternoon and did spiritual practice stuff together. and then took some time off, and then there were workshops that were either for middle school or high school, and then we came back together at night for fun things. And it was just kind of amazing, honestly, how much it actually simulated real camp feelings in various ways, and just really, they just went with it, honestly. Like, they didn't hold back, and they did everything just like as if it were a real camp, except you weren't sleeping over there. We even had like campfire videos that we would listen to music at night and like act like we were all around the campfire, and just a lot of intention, and like worked super duper hard, tons of meetings, tons of staff, and lots of intentionality, but it really came together nicely. And Jessica Leichman was the one behind that, and is probably a great resource if folks wanted to hear more about that and how that sort of came together.
Thanks. She is amazing, Jessica. Maybe a couple others or something in the chat, and then we'll need to. Okay, well, let's move on. Thank you all. I'm so glad. I hope you got some good information and idea sharing, and let's go to our next slide if possible. And we are recording again. We'll see if it'll behave.
Real quick, was anybody about to raise their hand and speak up? I want to just
Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah. Thought I might have glanced somebody. Okay. So moving on. One thing I did in preparation for this webinar was that I asked youth for feedback. So we wanted to hear sort of maybe some of their suggestions. So we have in the Southern region, we offer an event called The Point, which is a multi-generational family camp offered in Oklahoma at Lake Murray every non-pandemic summer. And everybody's welcome. And our youth group from The Point meets online about once a month. And I just asked them, just point blank, what is one piece of advice you have to offer for adults doing virtual youth ministry? And so just a little feedback of what I got. Don't get repetitive, as in the same structure or style of activities over Zoom can get very boring very quickly, at least for me. Somebody else, don't make things too long and drag on and such. Another piece, it's super duper important to develop relationships between the youth. It's not a waste of time, and it makes all of the difference. And keep the perspective that it isn't teachers, students. Everyone has valuable perspectives, and we can learn from one another. And then finally, the last piece of advice I got was, don't try too hard to replicate something in person in a virtual sphere, which as we heard from Sam earlier, it sounds like something that something was really successful, that had something had been translated really successful from in-person to virtual sphere. So so there are different approaches. And from what I've heard, some have worked really well and some not so much. So we'll leave that up to you to discern. And finally, I want to dive into a few things that we offer in terms of virtual youth ministry through the UUA and through the Southern region. So one big thing that we're offering right now is it's called the Ships Ahoy Leadership Experience, Youth Leadership Experience. And this actually, even before this was a hybrid leadership experience. It was partially in person and partially virtual. So it consists of 4 different modules. One is leadership. One is learning the fundamental roles of of a UU leader, that being covenant, justice making, congregational leadership. We cover scholarship, which is UU history, where do we come from, what is our identity, discipleship, which explores spiritual practices, and worship, how to co-create worship. And then partnership was when we actually pair individual youth with both mentors from their congregation and mentors on staff from the UUA. So they get one-on-one in-person coaching from a UUA staff person and somebody in their congregation to figure out what it is that their passion is, what drives them about faith formation, and how can that energy be channeled into the congregation. So it's really great. We are offering it this fall virtually for the Mississippi and Alabama clusters. That's who we had planned to do it in person with. And then, but we'd love to bring it to you and your congregation or your cluster of congregations or your area. So if you want to find out ways in which we can partner and offer this, we're here for you for that.
And Jessica's asking what ages. This is high school cohort,
High
correct?
school age, yes.
Yeah.
And let's see, yeah, Nancy, did you want to add anything else?
No, there's some other examples coming up, but this would be an amazing experience, and we very much, and Scott Kazmaier was asking also about clusters, we want to be responsive to your needs. We can't be your capacity, but we can help create the sort of construct. If there was a virtual youth group meetup, we could certainly help with kicking that off. This is more of an in-depth leadership immersion experience. And Jessica's asking, so if we're teaching about leadership, how does that work? Oops, I lost that. I lost that question. How does that work? When kids go away to college and we lose them, we pray that we have opportunities to keep them and that there's something that happens with their sense of UU identity, that they're thirsting to grow in their faith. But we have to be greater and more intentional, and congregations hopefully will reach out. Anybody else want to say anything about that question? So let's go to the next slide. We've just got about... Oh, please.
I don't think, I actually know I live over in Northeast Tennessee, and one of our students, when they graduated and they went out to Ohio and the university, she actually became extremely active in her UNU church up there, to the point where apparently the UU church that was out there often has college students who are on the board of trustees. So I don't know if it's necessarily that we might be losing them at our home church, but ideally they would be going out to different churches and becoming either leaders there, or even returning to their home church that they grew up in, or moving out to different churches. I'm seeing here in the chat that others are saying the same.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
So I'll also say, where we fall short as UUs is helping youth learn how to be in church, and B, helping church learn how to have youth. I feel strongly that we fall short in both areas. We don't teach churches enough about how to adapt their programming and their style of faith development to be inclusive of the needs of youth. And we go off and create separate cultures for youth to engage in, and not to say that youth don't need their own autonomous spaces, age-appropriate spaces, but when we create cultures so radically different from that of the congregation, there's no familiarity in terms of what they bridge into. They don't have anything to bridge into. So the programs that we create, we really want to address those needs. We want to help congregations adapt to having youth. We want to create programming that bridges the gap between youth culture and congregational culture. So this is a big piece of it. This teaches how to engage with the congregation. Another program that I'll lift up is Meaning Makers, and that is for emerging adults, ages 18 to 24. And that's actually going on as we speak virtually, but it happens every year, and you can contact Jenica or Stevie Carmody in the Faith Development Office or the Lifespan Faith Engagement Office to find out more about that. There was another program that just passed called Faith Lab, which was also offered by them. It was just all virtual faith development. We mentioned the College of Social Justice, the UUNO. They're all ways in which youth can engage with our broader faith. Should I go to the next slide, Nancy?
Please, yeah. Sorry, the minutes are ticking. We just have 5 left. But know that, you all are blessed to be in the southern region, that any leadership experience, you're going to get insights into the dimensions of faith development, which is original research that Natalie Briscoe has done, which you really do get a grounding in what each age cohort needs. So if youth have been fed and helped to grow in their own faith, they will remain in our faith because they have the narrative and the stories, and they have the sense of trust, and they have this sense of their own personal growth, community growth. So it's so important to realize that. So we're just going to do kind of a quick overview of some concrete resources. All of this will be sent to you. There's a separate resource list. Cameron and I get a lot of questions from religious educators about what to do about OWL. And so Melanie Davis in our national office has this resource here. And so know that there are some alternatives. If we could just go, we're sort of at that fast resource table, sort of image that we're in a large convention center. We're all over at the resource table. Please explore Leader Lab nationally. Amazing resources for every age on the in the whole lifespan world. There's this great piece that could apply, especially talking with youth, about COVID-19, simple online faith formation, which is also through Leadership Lab, Leadership Library. Soul Matters, I hear such great feedback. So many congregations are getting incredible help. Even if you are a smaller congregation, it really does merit your attention. Let's go to the next slide. Church of the Larger Fellowship, they should be our guru in all virtual things. They have historically been doing this for so long, but here's a really neat new twist with Church of the Larger Fellowship. There's something called Community Now UU, which are fostering real connections in a virtual world. It is crowdsourced links for experiences, not open to all, not bound by geography. Check it out. And there's also a lot of videos. The View program has some great pieces. Let's keep going. So this is my I keep a little notebook of notes about what I consider YPPs. These are youth program possibilities. This was one I discovered crowdsourcing on the COVID Religious Professional Facebook page. This is virtual improv. Wouldn't it be neat to have all of your youth together with empowering adults who are doing improv of one-word story narrative, which is sort of building it as you go along, but definitely watch the instructions first, but it has great potential, especially if you kind of think about maybe some ways to sort of lighten the hearts. And let's keep going, virtual improv. So TED Talk model, and this gets back to the Church of the Larger Fellowship as well. There is a UU Talk videos that are there, I mentioned on the View. Well, there's also, I think, an amazing possibility here. So I mentioned that a lot of teens say to me that my congregation doesn't need me in this time of crisis. I'm just sort of there, and I'm just really not being asked to do anything. What if you ask them to be the curators of the emerging story of how your congregation responded during this time of COVID, and you ask them to begin to make short interviews or videos about what has been going on, the things right and the things wrong. One of the first things a teen said to me was that they did a virtual Easter egg hunt. They helped with one, and that would make a funny kind of neat video. They did it on Google Maps. So just something to consider, but look at these UU Talks. I think every youth loves to TED Talk model. It's very concise, so let's keep going. And again, you'll get all of these. These are just ones that I've been coming up with. In my home congregation, there is a traveling mascot. It's a gnome. Of course, University of Kentucky is here in Lexington, and it's in blue and white, the gnome. But it is the youth actually take the gnome. Someone will actually contact the religious educator and say, this person's really down or having some health issues. Well, let's go and deliver the gnome there, or someone's having a birthday. And so they wake up and the gnome is in their yard, and it's got a message. There's a photo taken of it. It's put on the congregational Facebook page. So it's a traveling congregational gnome, but it also has great potential. Groups coalesce if they begin to choose a mascot. What if you actually engaged with your youth and said, what would our virtual mascot be during this time of pandemic? And everybody could bring images to that session. Like, for instance, an otter. Otters like to hold hands while they're sleeping because they really help to build community that way. So those are just some fun ideas for fun and fellowship. So let's keep going. And I realize my voice has speeded up. I think this is the last sort of suggested resource. This one I came up with and actually created, merging together. I'm in a group spiritual direction group, an online group, and one of the quieter activities that we've been doing together is contemplative photography. So we'll take a photo of something gorgeous that we see out on a nature walk, and we'll post it in our group, and people don't say anything to each other. They just focus on this beautiful photograph, and then later on they sort of share a few written words of how it inspired them. Well, what if we were to ask our youth and actually to do some grounding in the 5 smooth stones as inspired by James Luther Adams? And what if they were creating 5 smooth stone kits, which are dropped off at other youth's houses? And so the stones would have, and the detail is all here, but basically each stone would have a message on it: hope, joy, love, justice, and courage. Well, what if these stones showed up in a photographic montage? All of a sudden, one youth decided to put the hope stone in the midst of a really challenging, visual scenario, and posted that, like, yes, you can find hope even next to our garbage cans or something like that. I hope you get this sense. There's so much potential with going theologically deeper, but inviting the youth to be leaders to help create this is really important. So now I'm going to just take a pause and catch my breath, and we're already a minute over. We're at closing, but you'll get all of these, and there's also a separate resource page created, and we want to stay in conversation with you as you explore these ideas.
So everybody take a deep breath. I know we're a minute or two over. We threw a lot at you, and I want to go back and reiterate, you're still enough, and you don't have to do everything. So thank you so much for being here with us and for hanging in there. And I'm going to sing us out. I wish we could all unmute ourselves and sing together, but I think that's going to be a cacophony of noise if that happens. But while you're muted, feel free to sing along with me in this one, and assume whatever a comfortable posture is, a prayerful or a reverent posture. Make us aware we are a sanctuary, each made holy and loved right through. With thanksgiving, we are a living sanctuary anew. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care, everybody.